It was a late autumn evening when Ava called, her voice more urgent than usual. "Zoe, I need you to come over now," she said. My heart skipped a beat. Ava, my older sister, was the kind of person who never showed vulnerability. She was always in control, the perfect picture of success, with a thriving marriage and a beautiful home. I couldn't imagine what could be so serious that she'd ask for help like this. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "No," she whispered, and then the line went dead. The drive to her house felt longer than usual, each passing streetlight heightening my sense of unease. I wasn't used to this side of Ava. Normally, she was the one lecturing me on how I should get my life together and move out of our parents' house. "You're 35 and still single. You should be building your own life, Zoe," she'd say. But tonight, something had shifted, and it left me feeling unsettled. When I arrived at Ava's house, it was dark except for a faint glow from the living room window. I let myself in, the door unlocked, which was unusual for her. Ava was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, but she didn't look up when I entered. Her husband Henry wasn't anywhere to be seen. I sat down beside her, waiting for her to speak. Minutes passed in silence before she finally broke it. "Henry's been having an affair," she said, her voice hollow. My heart sank. I didn't know what to say. Henry? The same Henry who always seemed like the perfect husband? "How did you find out?" I asked quietly. Ava stared into her wine glass as if searching for answers there. "I found his phone, saw the messages. He wasn't even hiding it that well," she said, her voice bitter. I had never seen her like this before. So vulnerable, so broken. I could barely process what she had said. Henry cheating. I'd known him for years, and nothing about him had ever raised any red flags. He was charming, attentive, and always seemed to adore Ava. But as I looked at her now, I realized that even the most seemingly perfect lives could harbor secrets. "Are you sure?" I asked, knowing how ridiculous the question sounded the moment it left my lips. Ava shot me a look that made it clear she didn't appreciate the doubt. "I read every single message, Zoe. There's no mistaking it. He's been seeing someone else for months," she said, her voice shaking slightly. She put the glass of wine down and ran a hand through her hair. I felt a pang of guilt. Here I was, the single sister she always pitied, now feeling thankful for my lack of complicated attachments. "What are you going to do?" I asked, but I already knew that Ava didn't have an answer to that. She had spent so long building this image of a perfect marriage, and now it was all falling apart. "I don't know," Ava admitted, her voice breaking. "I just can't believe he'd do this to me. After everything—" She trailed off, her eyes brimming with tears. I had never seen her cry before, not like this. I moved closer to her, feeling helpless. "You don't have to decide anything right now," I said softly. "Just take some time to process it." Ava wiped her eyes and nodded, but the pain in her expression was undeniable. For years, she had preached to me about how perfect her life was, how I needed to aspire to have what she had. And now, it seemed like everything she had built was crumbling around her. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of her confession hanging heavy in the air. It felt like the room was shrinking, suffocating us both. Eventually, she spoke again. "I feel like such an idiot. I should have seen this coming." Her voice was filled with self-loathing, and it hurt me to hear her like that. "You're not an idiot," I said firmly. "You trusted him, Ava. That's what people in relationships do." But even as I said it, I could feel her doubt creeping in. Ava had always been the confident one, the one who had everything figured out. Now she looked lost, like she didn't know who she was anymore. "I just don't understand," she whispered. "How could he do this to me? To us?" She buried her face in her hands, and for a moment, I didn't know if I should leave her alone or stay. "Do you want me to talk to him?" I offered, though the thought of confronting Henry made my stomach turn. Ava shook her head. "No, I don't want you to get involved," she said, her voice muffled. "This is between me and him. I just need to figure out what to do next." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "What would you do, Zoe?" she asked suddenly, and I was caught off guard. It was a question I didn't have an easy answer to. What would I do if I were in her shoes? Could I forgive something like that? Could I ever trust again? I don't know, Ava, I admitted. I'd like to say I'd walk away, but it's not that simple, is it? She nodded slowly, understanding that there were no easy choices in a situation like this. I don't even know if I want to save this marriage, Ava said, her voice barely audible. But the thought of ending it, of starting over, it's terrifying. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of the unknown, the fear of losing the life she had spent years building. You don't have to decide anything right away, I repeated. Take your time, talk to him, and see how you feel. You're allowed to be angry, but you're also allowed to take a step back and think. Ava let out a shaky breath, her body trembling as she tried to regain control. I just don't want to feel like this anymore, she said softly. Over the next few days, Ava avoided Henry entirely. She moved back in with our parents, and although she tried to act like everything was fine, I could see the strain on her face. She didn't talk much, and when she did, it was never about Henry. I didn't push her, figuring she'd come to me when she was ready. Then one evening, Henry showed up at our parents' house unannounced. I was sitting in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell ring. Ava was upstairs, and my parents had gone out for the evening. I hesitated before answering, knowing instinctively that it was him. Zoe, is Ava here? Henry asked as soon as I opened the door. He looked like a wreck. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. She doesn't want to see you, I said bluntly. Henry sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. I just need to talk to her, please. Against my better judgment, I let him in. Ava needed closure, and maybe this conversation would give her that. I led him to the living room and went upstairs to get her. When I knocked on her door, she didn't answer right away. Ava, it's Henry. He's here, I said softly. I heard movement inside, and a moment later, the door opened. Ava looked at me, her face expressionless. He wants to talk, I added, though I wasn't sure if she'd want to. She stared at me for a few seconds before nodding slowly. Fine, she said. We went downstairs together, and the tension in the room was palpable. Henry stood up as soon as he saw her. Ava, I'm so sorry, he blurted out, his voice shaky. I know I messed up, but please, just hear me out. Ava crossed her arms, her face cold. What do you want, Henry? She asked, her tone sharp. Henry flinched at her words, but he didn't back down. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Henry began, his voice cracking. I don't know what I was thinking. It was a mistake, Ava, a huge mistake. I love you, and I don't want to lose you. His words were frantic, desperate. Ava didn't respond right away, just watched him with a blank expression. I stayed silent, feeling like an intruder in their emotional battlefield. Henry stepped closer to her, but she took a step back, her face hardening. You love me? She asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Is that what you call this? Lying to me for months? Sneaking around behind my back? Is that love, Henry? He opened his mouth to respond, but she cut him off. I trusted you, she said, her voice rising. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? Henry looked like he had been punched in the gut. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, Ava, just give me another chance. Ava shook her head, her lips trembling as she fought to keep her composure. I don't know if I can forgive you, Henry. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, she said quietly. Henry's shoulders slumped, and for a moment I thought he was going to break down right there in front of her. Ava, please. I'll do anything, he whispered. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Ava stared at him, her eyes unreadable. For a second I thought she might soften, that she might consider giving him a second chance. But then, she turned away from him, shaking her head. I don't think there's anything you can do to fix this, she said, her voice filled with finality. Henry's face crumpled, and he took a shaky breath. So that's it? It's over? Ava didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but resolute. Yes, Henry, it's over. Henry stood there staring at Ava as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He looked like a man who had lost everything, and in a way, he had. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, leaving it swinging in his wake. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. Ava stood frozen in place for a long moment, staring at the door as if expecting him to come back. But he didn't. Slowly, she turned to me, her face pale. It's really over, she whispered, as if saying it out loud made it more real. I stepped forward and pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly as she began to cry. The sobs racked her body, and I could feel the weight of her heartbreak. She had loved Henry, despite everything, and now she was grieving the loss of a life she had once thought was perfect. You're going to be okay, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if she believed me yet. In the days that followed, Ava moved out of their house and started the process of divorce. It wasn't easy, and there were times when she wondered if she had made the right choice. But every time the doubt crept in, she reminded herself of the betrayal, of the lies Henry had told, and it steeled her resolve. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life, piece by piece. She focused on her career, spent more time with friends and family, and started to rediscover who she was outside of her marriage. As for Henry, he tried to win her back, sending flowers and calling her repeatedly, but Ava stood firm. She had made her decision, and there was no going back. One evening, as we sat together on my couch, Ava looked at me and smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. You know, she said, for the first time in a long time, I feel free. I smiled back, proud of how far she had come. Ava had always been strong, but now she was learning to